Hello, hello, everybody. Hope everyone is doing well, ready for another Whip Wednesday. Good to see you all here. Slate, Victoria, Lily, Leia, Sheila, Tom, and Harry. Good to see you all. Switch it on up. Let's go. How's everybody doing today? People busy with the team challenge? They've been proper kicking off, so really cool to see what people have been up to. It's week one, so people are still working on the concepts and stuff, right? So nothing is in the works in the engine yet, but I think I have my entirety of Friday is booked off with like team meetings, so it's gonna be really cool to see. Hello, Top G. Who does the concept? The team themselves. They have to come up with the concept themselves. So it's basically it doesn't need to be good. It doesn't need to look attractive. It is basically there to inform what the team is going to be doing, right? So it can be a pencil sketch. It can be kit bash stuff together. It can be a collage of things. Like, it doesn't need to be pretty. Be functional. Yeah, that's been going good. We'll have been proper kicking off. We unfortunately already had our first team drop out, which is really unfortunate, but sometimes that's the way that it is. Hello, Sergio. Yeah, big oof, Lily, big oof. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate. But yeah, we still got enough teams left, so don't let that discourage anyone, you know? It is sometimes, I don't know, like I'll say, I think I've said this a couple of times, right? Where it is as much of a learning experience for us in the organization as it is for the teams that are doing the challenges as well. So sometimes you just encounter situations that you've not really thought about or should have probably thought out more than we did up until this point, right? So we learned, they learned, and then the decision was made to not continue. But that unfortunately happens. Let's see, what else have I been up to? Like, it's gonna be interesting. I need to get back into the flow where I give like weekly updates about the stuff that I'm doing now, because I am officially doing Beyond Extend full time now. Last week it was like in my last week of like still working for Playground Games. Now that's officially done. That chapter has closed. And now the next chapter opens where I'm going to be doing this full time again, which is really exciting. So I guess I took like a couple of days for myself, even though I feel like that's a lie. Because the team challenges literally started on the last day that I stopped working. So I don't know why I just said that, because it's been freaking chaos. But hey, well, no, it's actually not been chaos. It's just been there's no rest. Because actually this time around, the team challenge onboarding and the setup and the kickoff and all that kind of stuff actually went really smooth. So I'm really happy with it. Sunny was really happy with it too. So we're both just like, yeah, really happy that it went so smooth. Full steam ahead Beyond Extend. Let's go! Yes. It really is. Yeah, I'm excited about it. So, what I was gonna say is that, so for the past 2 days, we've been working with a person who's been making really awesome content for our course. And we just got the deliverable back from all the content, basically, right? So they gave us all the content, and now, because this would be a lot of the stuff that we've been doing up until this point is sort of like theoretical with like a little bit of exercises on top. This is like a full practical lesson. So it will take you all the way from the beginning to the end of something that I'm not going to spoil just yet. But I've been going through that content and making sure that it is as engaging as some of the other content that we have. Because some people might like that you have just like 2 hours or 4 hours in this case of content just to sit through. We don't think that that's the best way to engage with people. So what we are trying to do is we're trying to see how we can take that content and then split it up into like bite-sized chunks and build some other content around it so that you have a little bit of a break from just like looking at one video. So, but yeah, that's been like a whole journey. I've been doing that for the last 2 days, just really just going in editing software, just making sure like, okay, what is crucial? What can we replace with something else? So just been like doing all that, which has been really, really cool. Sergey is asking, how's it going? It's been going really good. I've been really enjoying going back to myself, even though there's a lot of responsibility, a lot of additional stress, all that kind of stuff. I do really enjoy having like all the responsibility on my shoulders now. It's not an easy thing, but I guess I prefer it that way. So yeah, been having a lot of fun, doing a lot of work on the courses, which is going to be like the main priority from this point. So yeah, in the next couple of days, I'll get back to the courses that I was building as well, like to the lessons, and start recording video content and all that kind of stuff too. So it's going to be full steam ahead. But yeah, what else has been happening? This actually happened just yesterday, but that's also something that I've been doing, is that we got the last 4 workshops of the back catalog. We got them back, so they're fully edited and they're going to be available to everyone with workshop access pretty soon. So we're going to add the 4 latest ones. Well, no, that's incorrect. Not the 4 latest ones, but 4 ones that were still missing are going to be uploaded soon to the website, so you'll see them appear in a couple of days when we send out an announcement as well. So that's also been happening. So that's been going good. And then we are, Evelyn is actually rounding off like the calendar for the end of the year. So we are getting really close to confirming the second person for December. So we already know who's going to be joining us for next month. We have a workshop coming up soon, I think. Let me double check here. Let's see. So events. If we go to our event calendar, yeah. So on the 28th, so that's in 6 days, we got light optimization techniques with Dario. It's going to be really exciting too. Looking forward to that. Are you planning to do freelance work other than BE? Good question, Slate. That's not the plan. Well, I see it more as like an opportunity basis, right? If like a good opportunity comes my way, then it would be kind of silly to say no, right? But I wouldn't take it in a full-time capacity anymore. So that is kind of off the table at this point. So yeah, if they say like, hey, look, we can only do this like 5 days a week, that's all we offer, then I'm unfortunately gonna have to decline. But I think what is more important is for all the complaining that I do about people that are in an educational position and then they don't really have like any sort of like relevant industry data to back it up, right? I don't want to end up in that position. So I think it's always good to kind of keep some sort of like foot inside of the industry, right? Whether that is like making my own stuff, whether that is like doing freelance or the occasional contract here and there, we will have to see. But yeah, we will see. Because for now, I mean, you might have already seen it. I've opened like more mentorship slots. That would kind of be like what I would focus on right now. And then who knows what's gonna happen in the future. Turn the music down a little bit. So yeah, we will see. It's a good question. You can tell that I'm really prepared with this, right, Slate? Hello, Gizem. Thanks for the great tutorials, by the way. Oh, thank you so much for saying so, Gizem. I feel like most of them are like pretty out of date though, but thanks for saying no. Hello, Justine. Welcome, welcome. So yeah, that's been going on. It's gonna be interesting. I'm really excited with what's going on. Obviously we have a lot of the table already with BE. And it's time to honestly just like double down on what we're doing and like get the course out there, get that up and running, and then maybe do something on top of that, but we'll see. But yeah. How is everyone else doing though? Feel free to let me know if you're working on something exciting. And then for people that are just jumping in and are new to this, just let me say hi, right? I'm Timothy, senior environment artist, until recently, I guess. But I've been working in games for about 10 years. And now this little session is basically about giving back to the community and like sharing feedback with some of our community members, which we're going to do in a little bit as well. So yeah, welcome. I love it to see you all. And if anyone has any questions about game dev, environment art, your own career in game dev, feel free to ask them. Let's see how we can help. Yeah, I've been a little bit out of the loop with game news as well, so I have no freaking clue what's happening. Which might also be a good sign because that means that I'm engaged with other stuff. But yeah. Yeah, it is an interesting one. It's an interesting question. The question of doing freelance or any other work on top of it. So yeah. Oh yeah, I didn't even think about that one, Adam. Until recently makes it sound so dramatic in this day and age. Yeah, that is true. That is true. It was until recently because of my own volition, right? So I made the decision to quit. So it is not because of some like, I don't know, unexpected boot that I'm out on the streets now. It's my own decision. But it is scary, yeah. Is although like I feel okay. Oh, I don't want to say it. I don't want to say it. It feels like I'm jinxing it, you know. But it kind of feels like it's quiet. It feels like companies have kind of stopped kind of stopped doing the layoffs, you know? Look, I don't know. Let's see. But yeah, we'll see. Yeah. I hope that they stopped. Like, God, I'm so tired. Justine is asking, are the workshops a different format than the videos posted on this channel? Or the videos here are older workshop videos? Yeah, that is exactly right. So all the videos that we release are videos from our back catalog that we have for the workshops. So they are the same. So yeah, like they're pretty much the same. The main benefit that you get is when you are there live, you can actually, there's a Q&A session that we never post, and that is purely there for people that are there for the workshop live, and they get to ask questions live to the person. But those are not recorded, and they're like a little treat that we give for the members that are there live and on the spot. Stefan is saying, man, I forgot to set up my environment for this week's feedback. Is it still possible to ask 2 questions about my process? Potentially. Feel free to update. Feel free to update your thread, and then maybe at the end we'll get to it. There's no promises there, though. Do you know if it's challenging to refine remote work as an environment artist? I feel like more and more studios are going back to hybrid or in-studio workflow. That is a good question, Victoria. I have no clue. I really have no clue, honestly. Remote work, I've never done it. I've always worked in-house. So I'm just speculating. It It's honestly, I think I have the same data as you have. Like, I watch the numbers and I watch the data and I read reports and all that kind of stuff. And from what I can tell is that all the bigger AAA studios, or like all the big studios, not necessarily AAA, um, they seem to be focusing more and more back on like getting people in-house, right? Or like hybrid at least. Which, I mean, they get to decide what they want. It's their company anyway. What I've always found more interesting when it comes to remote work is that it's harder to find concrete and relevant data on smaller companies. So whether they are hiring more remote, because I'm assuming that most of the remote work in general is not going to go to a bigger company, right? Because they have an established studio, they have like a studio that they pay for, they want people in house, blah 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 blah. Whereas smaller studios are oftentimes more flexible with that. So I feel that if I was to look for any sort of remote job, I would probably, for the most part, stay clear of any sort of job boards and just start looking for individual companies and just start reaching out that way. Might not be the most effective thing. I know that there's also some websites that are specifically made for remote jobs, right? So like, I don't know, games remote jobs, and you'll probably find like a couple of them. Um, but yeah, obviously, whenever you have like an aggregation website, that's where everyone goes, and that's also where it's going to be most busy, right? So I think you can do that, but then also don't forget to also reach out individually to companies or to your network or whatever, because that might give you an edge compared to all the people that are just looking on the job aggregation websites, right? You basically need to look at the whole market, and the market is really crowded right now. That also means that you have to think outside the box and do something that someone else is not doing, right? Regarding remote, I think it depends. In Warsaw, there's an example. Playing Wild Hogs, and I said that quite before, they prefer people working remote. Yeah, but like, I mean, name me like 10 studios, right? So like, I'm talking about in general. If we look at the whole market, they're clamping down, going more hybrid or in-house, right? Um, there's obviously a generalization that has to happen. I know that there's other companies out there like Void Interactive also works fully remote. I got some good friends of mine working there as well. And there's probably more examples, but it is quite tricky to find like a really big studio that does that, right? Like there's only like a handful of studios. And that's always where it's like, it's good to look at the numbers, right? Look at the data and then see, okay, where you can find like outliers in the data and maybe reply to them, right? Victoria saying, I heard that outsourced studios could be a good chance, but not sure how good those are. I think honestly, if you wanna really increase your skill level, I would go to an outsourced studio. It might be a bit more tricky because you don't get seen as like a main developer, right? Like getting credited on games is a little bit trickier. There's usually like long waiting periods before you can show stuff on your portfolio, all that kind of stuff. It has a lot of negatives, but honestly, if you want to work on a lot of varied projects in a short amount of time, an outsourced studio is like amazing. Like, to give you an example, so a friend of mine who I did a podcast with, Will, I can't remember exactly how many projects he worked on, but I remember, the only thing that I remember is that he worked on, I don't know, like four or five projects in the time that I worked on one. So it's like, yeah, it's crazy. Obviously, you don't do the whole pipeline, and there's like stuff to that as well. But if you want to really sharpen your skills, like an outsourced studio is really good. Now, there are a lot of outsourced studios, and there's a lot of them popping up. Because also, if you look at again the grand trend, right? Like the big trend is that by and large, it seems like bigger companies, again, they're downsizing, they're moving away from expensive positions, like think California, all that kind of stuff. It seems like they're downsizing in the more expensive locations, and then they're moving more of their production to outsource or work with more outsourced partners or something like that, right? So it seems like there's an offset happening there, which also means that there's going to be people that are trying to go into that trend, start their own outsource studio, and there might be a lot of chaos when you join a new outsource studio, right? Because who knows who's leading them, right? So whenever something like that happens, whenever a shift like that happens, I always try to approach it with like a little bit of caution and do like a little bit of extra searching on who's behind the studio, who works there, and maybe reach out to individuals working in that company to see if it is like a company that has the right values. Let's see. Babu is saying, I have one actually. I wanted to ask what you think makes someone senior in 3D artist position other than just experience. I lost my job recently and my company stopped existing and I do a lot of thinking. Okay. So yeah, what makes the difference between a let's say a junior and a senior, right? Or like a junior, a mid, and a senior. To be fair, a lot of it comes down to experience, but what that experience means is usually responsibility without having any person to check in with you, right? So for example, if we simplify it a little bit, as a junior, what you have to do is you have to get stuff done within a certain timeline. That timeline is usually going to be slightly longer, right? To compensate for the fact that you're a junior, usually. And also, you're going to have someone helping you out, get feedback, and there's going to be feedback rounds and all that kind of stuff. Whereas compared to the senior, you're supposed to be doing stuff. You're supposed to be doing stuff in a way quicker turnaround. You have way more responsibility. So what that means is that you are in charge of building benchmarks, right? So these are like, oh, we haven't set a benchmark for the quality of art that we can drive in like a certain location or maybe for the game. You are the person to do that, right? So once you do that, then the rest of the team is going to use that as an example to see how far they need to push their art to kind of see what the benchmark is, right? And then also you have to do it fully independently, right? That is the expectation. Like full independence, you get ownership of you get big ownership, but also big responsibilities that come together with it, right? And then also potentially less feedback. You're still going to have feedback from the art director, from the lead, and all that kind of stuff, but you're going to be way more independent than a junior does. Yeah. So that's roughly the thing, right? Like the reason why you get like extended timelines as a junior or maybe as an intermediate is that there is still that expectation of like, oh, they're still learning a lot of stuff, right? Whereas with a junior, you should be more solidified, you should be up to date with like a broad range of topics and kind of know how to approach different things so that you can basically just get started quicker than anyone else can. I hope that explains it. That's a good question, though. That's a good question. Sometimes, yeah. I will say one caveat to this whole conversation is there's the reality, right? What actually happens on the floor, like in a studio, and there's also the perceived reality, and there's oftentimes a difference between them, right? So what I just said, right? Like all that I just said is supposed to be somewhat the reality, right? But if you enter the industry, you're gonna encounter situations where you are gonna be doing stuff that is not at your responsibility level, even though you don't get compensated for it, right? Happens quite frequently. But that's also gonna happen. Hello, Swan. Welcome. Borak is saying time management, maybe? Oh, yeah, for example. Yeah. Time management is a big thing, right? getting a bit more of an accurate estimation on how long a task is going to take, right? I think that's definitely going to be a big part of it too. But yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else that differentiates, but I think those are like the main topics, really, from like a very general perspective, right? Because when it comes down to the day-to-day stuff, right? Like most people will be doing the same thing. Like we'll be using the same tools, we'll be using the same workflows. There's just an expectation that you are quicker with everything that you do, right? It's like almost like a speed bonus that you get. Yeah, it's a good question though. Layoff is a Great Depression back in the day. I don't know about that one. Oh, Mike is saying about the outsource studios. I think that is totally true. Awesome. Because also, I need to say about the outsource thing, like I've never worked for an outdoor studio, right? So most of my knowledge comes from like people that have worked there and told me stuff about it. But that's also just my assumption, right? If you think about where they are in the hierarchy as well, it kind of makes sense that they just get to work on like more projects and all that kind of stuff too. Yeah. I have an interview for a senior position, and reading requirements, I was feeling everything, but I also wanted to see what might be the expectation beyond what's on the list. Well, like, what is going to happen is that you're going to be looking at an application, and most of those expectations are going to be quite vague, and they're going to be quite vague by design, because they also don't want to like bottleneck themselves. Like, let's say, I don't know, let's say they're super specific, and they say like, oh, we want you to make like the most realistic like vehicles, and then they ask you to do like statues, and you're like, hey, what? This is not my job description, you know? So usually that's why like applications are like relatively vague. They were just like, so that they have like a little bit more, I don't know, flexibility, I guess. And also, we're working on creative product, so sometimes we think that we're going to do one thing, and it might end up being a completely different thing altogether. It's crazy sometimes what happens during development. Hello, Amundi. Welcome. Good to see ya. How are you doing? But yeah, and then you still have like the split that happens with like above senior, right? Where you go from like a principal position or like a lead position, and then a whole bunch of different responsibilities that happen there. Yeah. That's a different can of worms. I mean, principal is not too different. I think from lead, that's where it gets a bit more different to what you would expect. All right. Let's sit on down. And let's get into some feedback. Because I do have to get up bright and early tomorrow morning. Because I need to go to the embassy to sort out some stuff. Already the hands? Okay, that's cool. Dang, that was good. Yeah, so well, if you wanna be seen first, raise your hand, you know. Babu was saying lead is given up a bit working for meetings. Well, it's in most cases, from what I've seen, it's not giving up just a little bit. It is honestly giving up a lot. Depending on the company, right? This is where it gets tricky because different companies have different ways of working. Like one company might be more top down, another company might be more bottom up, like yeah, flat hierarchies, all that kind of stuff. So there's different ways of thinking. But yeah. All right. For people that are just joining, feel free to keep asking questions about being in game development. But what we will do is we're going to switch on over And we're going to be starting with some feedback for today. Who was first? Sergey was first. At least on my screen. Let's actually make it... Yeah, okay. There we go. Sergey, continue to working on this cool little piece. Let me get Discord up and running as well so that we can check what people have been asking for. Okay, before we get into things, I have a question to everyone that participates in Whip Wednesday. You know, whenever I make the announcement saying that you have to submit an hour before, is that confusing? Because I wonder, sometimes I see people like jumping in late, and I wonder if I need to change the message at all to make sure that people submit before that cutoff deadline. Because I'm genuinely wondering, right? Because like sometimes I think that maybe if I change the wording, or maybe what I could do, I need to figure this out. Maybe what I could do is I'll make it like a dynamic time that you have to submit before a certain deadline. We'll see. Did I not submit it now before? I think you did. But there's every week, for example, there's like a couple of people that seem to miss the deadline, and I'm not sure if that's something that I can. Maybe we need to change, especially for new people, right? Like once you get in the groove, I think it makes sense, right? But maybe for new people, it might make more sense that we change it to a dynamic time or something like that. Never thought about it again after reading it for the first time. Yeah. Okay. Maybe I'll work on it a little bit. Because now I got the time to do that. Yes. And I can also finally change the intro images, and I can finally make them look proper. Because those stretchy images from all the team challenges, they're kind of annoying me. So I can finally fix that up. Makes sense to me. I think some of us are just bad at hitting deadlines. Maybe, right? For me today, I was just posting my stuff later because I was just adjusting last minute stuff. Okay, that makes sense. But that's also, you missed the deadline, right? So I missed Stefan, I missed Slate, and I missed you as well. So, because, okay, so to explain what's happening in the background, right? Like I have this automated system that as soon as it hits, 7, my current time, it will just like look at the Discord, get everything, and then it just gets like all the data, right? So I hit him early. This time I was a few minutes late. Yeah, I saw. Okay, we'll see what we can do. Thanks all for your feedback, and then we'll see if we can adjust it. Make it a little bit clearer, or maybe do something else where it gives you like a little bit of a grace period. We'll see. Not really, though I was curious if I'm late. Will it go to next week? If you're late, yes. Well, so see, like it depends, right? Like if I don't so what I do is at 7, so an hour before the live stream, what I'll do is I'll do a whole bunch of prep and make sure that I have like things to talk about, right? And when we're doing some like last minute stuff, that just like bogs the whole thing down. So I think at that point, like I'll rather just leave it to the next week, or sometimes what I'll do is like do it after the chat. But I prefer not to, because then it goes into like my time, right? So I would rather. That's why I'm also asking about some feedback for the messaging around this, right? Is that if we can sort of work towards like a system that works for everyone, then that would be the perfect solution. Yeah. Sorry to hit everyone on the head with like the boring backend stuff, but give you some context. Charlie is saying, I have work tomorrow morning. Not sure if I'll be able to stick around for the feedback. Is it okay if I watch it back if I didn't catch it? Yeah, that's totally fine. I usually say that it's to your benefit that you can be here. So maybe we can scoot you up a little bit, but we'll see. Because yeah, you're pretty far down the line as well. We'll see. Okay, let's get cracking. So Segu is we'll start there. Segu has 2 questions. Pretty simple questions. So do the fog cards at the bottom of the scene feel too strong, and do they make the scene feel unbalanced? I feel like they're a tad too strong. Yeah. It kind of, again, when I'm looking at this, I'm looking at the contrast between dark and light, right? And when the contrast between here and here gets a little bit much, that's when it gets like a little bit more distracting, right? So yeah, a tiny bit. So that might be worth lowering. That wouldn't be a bad shout. And then the second question was, do the metal textures feel too noisy or too dark? So I don't think they are too dark, but it probably depends on where we're looking at them, right? The metal here, no issues with whatsoever. But again, currently with the way that this building is textured, it's just a contrast between those two surfaces is very stark, where maybe we can do something with that, or I don't know how it is in the concept as well. Yeah, so in the concept, like the surface of the building itself is going to be more rusty and more worn down. So maybe once we do that like additional pass on the textures of the building, right? Once we got some like, I don't know, like stuff going on, like over here, there's some gunk, and there's like some gunk here dripping down. Once that is all in, we're basically massaging the metal texture or like the dark surface into like the white surface behind it, right? This is why I'm saying like it's all about iteration, right? That's where just be at this point it's just like, hey, look, it's just a basic texture. I know that I'm going to do vertex painting and decals and all that kind of stuff on top of it, but that's going to come later, so I'm not going to be worried about it. Metal also has some white in the concepts. Yeah, it's almost like I think it's a beautiful way of kind of saying like, hey, the plaster, someone made the plaster and then like it was like a cheap job, and then they just spilled some of the plaster like dust or something like that on the pipes. Could be cool, right? Could be cool, but what it does from like an artistic perspective is that it merges those two surfaces together, right? It blends them together quite nicely. So yeah, that could be like a cool thing, because I'm seeing that, yeah, you got like some like white areas going on your pipe in the concept. So that could be interesting too. Again, later down the line, we'll do that with a simple decal or something like that, or maybe some vertex paint, and that's done, right? We shouldn't be worried about that right now. So yeah, this is what I mean, right? Like I think last week we talked about like trusting yourself. This is also just like, okay, I know that stuff comes later down the line. I know that it might not look great right now. That's fine. I'm just gonna keep going. Huge bird droppings would be a no-go for the pipe. Oh yeah. Yeah. Like that's gonna be massive bird droppings. Oh my god. That's like, because like in the concept there's like a car, right? And the car is like this size underneath it, right? Like if we're then assuming that this is gonna be bird droppings, that's like, oh my god. That does like structural damage if like you have like massive birds just pooping on the side of like this building. Yeah, but cool stuff though. Cool stuff. Quick 2 questions. Bird attack. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. The idea with the plaster is good. Well, I don't think it was my idea. I think that was more like the intent of like the concept, you know? It's just like how do you like logically like weave them two together, right? It's almost like we're doing it for the purpose of the art, right? So that we're blending stuff together, but also like if we can then use something that is quite close to it, I think that's beautiful from like a storytelling perspective. Corrosive bird poop. Hell yeah, this entire scene is going to be gone. Okay, cool. Thank you, Sergio. Appreciate it. And really cool to see the updates. As always, great stuff. Keep on trucking. All right, next one. Leia. Leia is next. Cool. So, 2 questions for Leia. I condensed them a little bit. First one is roofs. How do you make them? Hi there, Leia. So, you were asking me about industry standard workflows for roofs. I'll tell you something beautiful about games. Whenever people say industry standard in games, it makes me chuckle a little bit. Not because you said so, right? Because there's no industry standard. Every game has their own approach and their own engine, and they're doing it in a slightly different way. So there's really like a bunch of choices. I gave you like a quick example. So you can kind of see the whole spectrum here, right? Where at the left we have the easiest solution, which is only tileables. So we have like a basic mesh, we slap a tileable on it, cool. Maybe the next step is adding POM to that tileable, because then at least we get some depth. The next step would be that we actually start adding some of the edges, right? So imagine that this whole frame is just flat, right? It's just like a plane, maybe with like a little bit of a curve in it, right? And then the only thing that we're doing is we're cutting around the tileable, or we're adding like a little edge here, right? That would be the next step up. Right, you can kind of see, okay, this is starting to look nice. We're deforming the silhouette a little bit. Maybe we can do like a pass on the up top as well. Right, and then we get some like nice silhouette read. Right, so that's what we have here. Add geo on top as well. And then we can also, in certain areas, we can start doing that on the side. We can start doing that up top. And you kind of have like the whole spectrum of like, okay, we have like individual tiles. Well, we basically have a tileable to begin with. Then we have individual tiles on the opposite end of the spectrum, where instead of making it from a tileable, we are just going to have like a small collection of tiles, and then we're just going to create a whole rooftop out of it. They both have their pros and cons, right? For example, if you wanna cut holes, or if you wanna have a roof that kind of has like a lot of holes in it, like let's imagine that like the whole roof is freaking destroyed, you know? Let's say some of this stuff. Right, let's say that is like our rooftop shape. We're gonna have to do a lot of patching between the tileable and the individual tiles, right? Because we can add like, if we assume that the red color is a tileable already, and that's the red color, and then let's go for something like blue. And then with blue, we can basically go in and like fill all the gaps around the silhouette where we just need like more tiles, right? That's like a workflow that does really well. And that basic concept is basically what we can use for any sort of roof, where if it's a big plane, you usually want to go with a tileable, and then anything outside of it is going to be, well, I call unique, or like individual bricks. Let's call them that. Not bricks. Little roof tiles. And then this is going to be tileable. Because the more that I'm thinking about it, making a full roof out of individual tiles, we're kind of losing the benefit, So I wouldn't even suggest doing this. Unless if you want something like really, really, really unique, right? Where like you can't even use a tileable because all the tiles are offset and randomly rotated and blah 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 blah. Then maybe. But it's gonna be an edge case. And then we can kind of see, right? Like I have some examples in my head. I was looking for examples. I had like a bunch of screenshots from like all the games that I played. I couldn't really find them. I think I might have like stored them on a different hard drive. For example, what the Kingdom Come Deliverance does, Kingdom Come Deliverance 1, does this. They only have like their entire roof. And then what they kind of do is like they have the edges come out and then you can kind of see like the individual cut marks at the end. But the rest of it is mostly flat, or sometimes what they'll do is they'll have like an additional edge to just add like a little ridge, you know? But they don't really go further than that. Whereas if you look at some of the rooftops in AC Valhalla, they approach it in a different way where they have more detailed cutouts. So what they will actually do is, imagine if this is like the side of your roof, right? Like they will have like individual layers of like these roof tiles. So instead of like keeping it straight, they will actually add a lot more geo to give it like a more interesting look. So that's AC Valhalla. Right. So give you like a couple of options. Feel free to play around with what you think is best, right? I think always going with a tileable underneath and then having tiles on top of it in areas that are like the most demanding, right? So usually that is again around the silhouette. If we want to add unique stuff around the silhouette, that is going to give us the most payoff. Where, well, honestly, so silhouette and viewing angle, right? Because these roofs, they're kind of out of viewing angle. If we get close to them, we can actually see. So maybe it would actually be worth it to also have like a little step that happens like every couple of rows or something like that. Right, that was it about roofs. Feel free to ask any other questions about that, Leia, into chat, while we kind of move on to transitions then. I know there was like a bunch of stuff about individual roofs, but I just wanted to lay out the spectrum, you know, of what is available. Right. In the meantime, let's move on to transitions. So your second question was, how are game studios able to create such nice transitions on their environment? I was looking at a bunch of images of the recent Mafia game and how they squashed meshes into each other. Meshes such as walls look very detail rich from a distance. Is there a trick to it? Or is it mainly very good material consistency that makes those transitions look so seamless? Again, a very good question, but it is a broad one, right? I think, if I'm not mistaken, and I was kind of trying to look at some quick breakdowns for the Mafia game, I think the way that they did it is that they just had actually, let's have a quick look. Let's have a quick look together. Don't want to speculate too much. Let me actually share my different screen here. Probably the wrong one. Oh, that's not even active. Wait, what is happening here? What is happening here? Okay, hold on. Let me at least add something. Oh, not that one. Let's do that one. And then where's this thing? There we go. Okay. Let's have a look to see if we can find some breakdowns, right? Because I know that someone shared some breakdowns like a while back, or like at least where you could kind of see some stuff happening, right? Because honestly, we can already tell at this point that what they are doing... Oh, sorry, I just made myself disappear here. Aww. Where am I? Oh god, so many things in here. There we go. So what we can already tell at this point is that we can see that there's a lot of geometry happening, right? So you can tell that this is, I don't know, is this using Unreal? I have no idea. I'm gonna assume so, or at least something that has sort of like relevant technology that kind of does the same thing, right? Because they do have a lot of geometric detail, which actually helps with blending things together, because it's way easier to have something that looks really detailed and just mashing it into each other, and then making it look good, right? If you have more topology, then that actually helps. There are various techniques to achieve blending in graphics, which is usually done at a shader level. Oh yeah. I mean, that's keeping it pretty broad. You have stuff happening at the shader level, the material level. In this case, like the actual asset level, right? But I'm assuming that they also use some of the like some world-based mask to their position, like to their advantage, right? So that means that you have like just generic masks on a bigger scale that help like blend surfaces together. They might also have RVT coming into play, so like runtime virtual texturing that helps blend stuff with the landscape as well, if we're talking about that sort of blending. But there's a lot of techniques on blending that are happening. But when you look at the actual buildings here, right, I am gonna make the assumption that if we're looking at a surface like this, for example, that a lot of that is probably gonna be a combination of like really highly detailed meshes that then also can be combined with vertex painting, right? Because we're kind of seeing some weird transitions happening here, which either is an indication that either this white thing is a mesh, or that the blending is kind of just like not working correctly, right? I mean, we're zooming in on like very specific things here. Yeah, you wouldn't necessarily expect some of those stones to like have a hard edge around them. But again, that might be because like this is made out of like multiple meshes. So you have, for example, the stone wall, and then you have like the plaster on top of it as like separate meshes. And think of them as like full kits, right? Where someone made like a bunch of like pretty generic stuff, and then you get to build like entire buildings with these kits. And because they all use the same sort of resources, they're all pulling from the same data, right? Making it more efficient. So yeah, that's the thing. Like, there's so many ways of like blending stuff together. If we go back to, for example, what you want to be focusing on at this point, it's probably going to be vertex painting and making sure that like your tilables blend together by themselves. That is going to be most beneficial for the work that you're going to be doing. Because yeah, I mean, some of this stuff Here's the cool thing that I like about like something like this, right? Like if we take a look at like this wall here, if well, I guess when I go back to Unreal, I want to experiment with stuff like this because this stuff is relatively simple to do. Let me explain. Because the main walls are just made with, I'm assuming in this place, displacement, right? Which is just basically using your height map from your texture that you already have, right? Because you get that for free whenever you make a texture inside a Substance Designer, right? So you just take that height map, you use that to feed the displacement here, and you get some like really dense looking geometry. The other way that you could also do it, and it potentially gives you more control and you don't have to rely on displacement in Engine, is that you could actually do the displacement before. So you could actually use a modifier stack to actually do this displacement in Blender and then already clean it up so that you can kind of crunch it to low enough so that you still get the visuals, but don't have to pay for like topology that's not really going to contribute to like the silhouette that you want to see, right? That's probably the way that I would be doing it. I love the moss placement here. Just like the same cluster probably, but just like rotated and kind of angled into the wall. So cool. Doing displacement in Houdini right now, it helps with the seams not being blown out. That might be, so there's multiple ways of doing displacement, right? God, I forgot the specific terms, but in Unreal, you can actually set it to, oh, what was it again? There's multiple ways that you can do displacement in Unreal. One, like I think the basic one actually gives you like a lot of seams, right? Because it looks at the seams that you have on the UVs and it's just going to extrude away from them. That is where the seams come from, right? But you can actually make them continuous inside of Unreal as well. Or at least do a better job than the basic one. The normal map does a lot of work on optimized displaced meshes. Yeah, 100%. Well, here's also the thing, right? Like, that's also another thing that comes into the whole like optimization spectrum, right? Because if you look at some of the original documentation on Nanite, the whole idea was that they were trying to save texture space, right? Because textures are really expensive because they take up so much bandwidth, right? Like they're pretty expensive to store on a hardware, so like on your disk. But then also you have to pull them in, and usually at these high resolutions they're going to be 4K or something like that, right? So we're pulling in heavy data. So that's why like they actually said that like, oh, if you then go to Nanite, right? Because they optimized like topology rendering so much that you can actually just let go of a normal map, right? Because if you go back to like the original thinking, a normal map was actually a replacement because the graphical hardware was not good enough to render all that geo in the first place, right? So we're getting to that point where a normal map is slowly being thought as like maybe becoming a thing of the past, right? Not that it's going to be faded out completely in like the next year, but I'm kind of thinking that we might see that in, I don't know, next year's, well, not next year's, but like in the next, God, what would the timeline be? I'm not even gonna put a timeline on it. We're just thinking about it in a different way, right? Where we might not need a normal map anymore. Right, let's switch back. All right, so we talked about a couple of things. Let me make some notes here. So honestly, for the most part, what is going to be interesting is vertex painting for surfaces, right? So that's when you have like large surfaces made up with like multiple tilables. You are going to be able to like vertex paint them together, and that's going to look good. With height-based textures. When we are thinking about blending stuff with the floor, we then want to look into RVT, which is runtime virtual texturing, which is basically looking at a sample of the data from like the landscape and then allowing you to use that in your shader graph, right? So we can then sample, let's say, the color data from the landscape in our shader, which is really cool for helping them blend together. I mean, not only the color, but also other maps. So that would be for landscape. There are a couple of tangents to this, or like a couple limitations where RVT gets quite expensive or just undoable when it comes to vertical surfaces. So let's say you have a tower that goes into the floor. Then we just need to mask that with a couple of good old tricks. Let's say we want to mask that first with meshes, or we just have a buildup of dirt or something around that, right? We can then use we can use this on landscape plus vertical surfaces. We want to use meshes in most cases. And those meshes, they can also be supported with like decals and stuff too, right? Because decals play a large role in the polish of transitioning surfaces, right? So that is more for polish stages. But they can be used on like a variety of surfaces. Hello, Sia. Hello, Amazart. I hope you're doing well. Hello, Joe. Don't know if I said hello already, but good to see you here. Lovely seeing you. Minimum requirement 5090. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. We gotta keep our Nvidia overlords happy, you know? We gotta keep buying them juicy graphics cards. Right. Okay. Thank you so much for posting your work, Leia. I would potentially love looking into some of like the workflows that like big companies do. I would yeah, I would really, that could be potentially, because now I have more time, I'm kind of looking around for like, okay, what can I do with that time, right? Like what would be interesting for the community. So also feel free to shout any ideas into the chat if you have them. That would be cool. Right, and in the meantime, we are going to move on. So who was the third one? It was Slate. Hello, color-coded insignia. Oh, but Slate, you weren't a part of the selection, so unfortunately, we're gonna have to skip you, buddy. We'll see at the end if we still have time. Again, no promises though. Cool. So, Victoria, let's have a look at what you're doing. Looking at workflows is super interesting. Gives you so much ideas for approaching different things. Yeah, maybe I'll play around with like a format like that. Or maybe, yeah, because I do like that you gave me the idea to talk about like, you know, look at a very niche thing from like a grander perspective, right, Leia? Where you asked me about like, oh, how does a roof get made? It could honestly be interesting to just have like a YouTube video or like a presentation or something around like the idea of how to make a roof, right? And like the different variations of how to make a roof and all that kind of stuff. And what the benefits and drawbacks are and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, let's have a look here. So the first question is, let's go to the little community tab again. Little fishing boat. So first question is for the ropes that wrap around the bamboo at the back of the boat. There are so many pieces. I thought to recreate one mesh, like a shell that covers it and repeats the silhouette and bake it. It looks fine from afar, but I'm wondering if it's a good way to do it. So I was a little bit confused because it could be about these ropes, right? Like about rope section A, or like these ropes, like rope section B. So I just kind of talked about them both. First of all, what I was gonna say, I think this looks really good though. Like, just having like all those like tiny ropes baked down like this, that looks really good. So that's what I said as well. I don't think you need to be worried about the visuals necessarily. I think that is looking great. What I will say though, yes, it's A. Okay, cool. No, it's all good. It's all good. I talked about both of them anyway, so. What I was gonna say is that this looks really good. What you can do to level it up even more though, is to add tension. Because that is really what sells the effect here, right? Because right now, if you look at it without my overpaint, is that it's almost too straight. You know, where I kind of want to see this whole thing just like wrapped and bundled around it, right? And I want to see tension in the whole structure as well. And that can apply to the tension that goes this way, right? Because it's supposed to be keeping like all these other structures together. But also just like the tension that happens when this then get fastened too, right? So that's what I try to indicate a little bit with my overpaint. That we kind of have like the tension happening between like all those sections, and then also having it like wrap around the whole thing. Cool. I got like, so that's about like the rope bundle A. Let's talk about rope bundle B now. What I said about rope bundle B is I think you can easily add like a couple more ropes here to kind of add to the visual interest, right? Where it's not just like one strap. You can have like multiple straps going around like another thing. That always is interesting to add, right? And then also I would potentially use like a little cylinder. I'm talking about like 3 edges or like 3 faces or 4 faces, so that we at least have the resemblance of a cylinder. And then you can just literally map that on like a little titleable section of rope. So you have like your whole UVs, you have like a little snippet with like a titleable piece of rope, and then you can just like map it on there. It's really, really simple to do like any rope. That's why I have so much fun with them. You kind of turn something super daunting into something super simple. Cool. There's one more addition that I didn't really talk about. If you are still worried, even though I don't think you should be, I think honestly the rest of it is going to come down to texturing. But if you have such a complex shape and you want to get really close to what it actually is, right? So you have, let me explain that better. So you have your complex high poly shape. And you want to replicate that for your low poly, but you don't know how. A couple of tools that I will use is, honestly, the quickest one is, well, a couple of ways that I tend to go about stuff like this, right? Is, let's say workflow A, is I will take my high poly, and then I will remesh, and then potentially like decimate, something like that, or do it the opposite way. Probably remesh first, and then decimate, and then UV. It's gonna be messy, but also no one really cares about the mess, right? Because this doesn't need to be perfect topology. It's an organic object. It's not gonna be animating, so we don't need that detail, right? Or option B, this might be more interesting for some the workflow that you're doing, right? Where you already have like a shell that's kind of built around it. What you can do is, again, starting from your high poly, build like a quick shell around it, right? So like build a quick low poly. It doesn't have to be accurate to the shape or whatever. And then literally use a shrink wrap. Or live surface. That can also be good. But live surface is a little bit more manual, but shrink wrap is automatic, right? What a shrink wrap does is basically you just make your low poly like slightly bigger than the high poly shape, and then you use that to shrink map your low poly to your high poly. And then if you have good topology on your low poly anyway, it's going to try to match the high poly shape as close as possible. So that means that you don't have to do any manual work, and it saves you a bunch of time, because having to like manually do all this stuff, again, not really helpful while you've already done it, but hey, here you go, couple of tips. And then the second thing was about we're switching gears and we're looking at hay, right? Or like any straw or hay or any kind of material like that. You've done the retopology and you were planning to bake it down, which, God, you can definitely do. But I am especially worried about like the ends here, right? Because I'm not saying that you can't, right? But it's more like the complexity of it and how are you going to get like all that like nice looking detail. I try to think more about things in like a modular way, right? So the way that I would break this up is I would actually go in there and have like my thatch or my hay tileable or like my hay texture, and I would split it up into a couple of ways. So at first I would have my tileable, which is going to be here. This is going to be my tileable section. Then I would have like a couple of like these end pieces, right? Probably like a little bit more here. So they can be used over here. And then I would have like a bunch of ends as well. So then we basically have all the components to make this shape into whatever we want, right? And we kind of built ourselves like a little texture set that we can kind of just use. And then you can do the same thinking here, but then have it as a part of your main texture, right? It doesn't have to be a separate thing. But the same philosophy can be used, right? But then we basically have just like a very simple core. We have like a core cylindrical sausage, right? That kind of just goes like straight through the middle. We have the tileable on the sides, we have the end pieces on the end, and then if you do like a little bit of massaging with like some nice curves and you make it like you kind of smoosh it in there and then you dress it up with like a bunch of these individual pieces at the end that kind of flay out, you stack some stuff in there, I think that's gonna look good enough. I think that's gonna be convincing enough to look real. And then I gave you this example. This is exactly the way that I did it for my medieval scene. Anything that used like thatch roofing, I use a simple texture for, right? The way that I structured it was like, these are my ends. So if you look at them, I mean, you're not going to really see it here, but we're basically looking at like the ends of thatch pieces and they're kind of sticking out at an angle. So it gives you like more volume. This is just like a little piece that I use at the top of buildings where you want to see that they're like held together with some sort of like, I don't know, some sort of like rope or something like that. Then we have like the main tileable here, which is no opacity. So this is fully opaque. And then this is like opacity end pieces, which means that I can literally add like whatever shape that I want here. And I can kind of just stack them on top of the main tileable, and I kind of can give it more depth than just having like a shell of the tileable, right? Mesh decals, yeah. So everything is going to be planes, or could I stick some model pieces, especially where the ends are? They don't have to be planes. You can... Oh, I see. You want to model these out completely? Probably not worth it. For how thin they are, it's probably not worth it. What you could do, again, we just some of them. Yeah, I was exactly going to say that, because we have all the pieces that we need now, right? So you have your tileable, and I'm pretty sure that you can just map like a single piece onto like a cylinder and then add like the end of the cylinder onto an end piece that you have. And then you have like an individual piece of straw that you can then kind of like hit bash in there too, right? So that could work. It's just you have to be careful with like how much geometry you use, right? Because let's say you use a 6-sided cylinder you're gonna use like a couple of them, like we're already adding like quite a lot to the poly count, right? But you can definitely do that though. You can definitely do that. Mesh decals. Not necessarily mesh decals, like, yeah, just like planes, like opacity, like floating above it. Going back to the roof idea. Yeah, but that's about it, Victoria. I just wanted to explain all that. Thank you for asking the question, and again, really cool to see how you're going about like all these individual pieces. It's cool. Yeah, great stuff. Thanks so much. No worries. Let's see, who was next? Stefan is next. Stefan is not next because you unfortunately submitted too late. Okay, so sorry, Stefan. Moving on. Charlie. Charlie is here. I don't know if Charlie is still here, but hey, there he is. Not asleep yet. Yeah, still holding strong. Unfortunately, no notes for you this time around. So we're gonna have to do it live. Let's have a look. Couple week progress, getting there with the trees. Happy with the progress so far. My questions are: will I be able to get some feedback on the composition of these two shots, especially the second one? That is this one. So this is shot number 1. If I can draw, please. There we go. Shot number 2. When I play through it and I walk the character through it, the reveal angle looks great, but I can't seem to get it to look good in camera. Is it an issue with the composition itself, or is it camera settings? The third screenshot is just for reference from a different angle. Okay, yeah. I omitted the third one. Yeah, okay, so we're talking about this one here. I mean, it is always going to be a balance between walking around the scene, right, where you have like a context and you're walking up a hill, so it's more about the full experience, and then comparing that to a still image, right? So there's going to be a slight difference there. What I will say about this image is that everything is just like pretty much dead on, right? Which is not the most engaging composition to happen, right? If I remember correctly, I might remember incorrectly as well. Oh no, we kind of talked about it. Oh no, I didn't actually. Alejandro talked about it. Alejandro brought up to look at the rule of thirds, right? Which could be interesting. So that means that we would just be offsetting the main focal point, and then we can potentially do something more like this, where if we were to make a quick sketch, right, and we wink, 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 wink. So that is it. We have our big guy up here. Maybe we kind of see him through like the bushes. Maybe even I want to actually put him like maybe even like a little further away. How are we going to do this? Because I'm also thinking about the other stuff that you said, right? Where you want to like really get that feeling of like verticality in there. So I'm thinking how to get that in, because we almost need to start playing around with like staircases. And then kind of build ourselves like a path that is kind of like going around. Sorry, my scribbles are going all over the place. Just thinking about this live. What I'm thinking is that if we want to do stuff like here, maybe what we'll do is we'll have like a couple of staircases. So this is going to be way more vertical than it is now. We're going to add like staircases down here. Right, so that we really add like that vertical, that verticality in here. And then we're going to be pulling the camera back. We're going to make sure that we shift the focal point more to the right. So we're trying to align it with this little line. And then what we can do from a top-down perspective is that, let's say we have our guy here. Like the camera is basically going to be here somewhat, right? And then we're basically going to create like a path that kind of swirls around this way with like a couple of staircases like in the middle. And then the rest of it, basically, we're just going to be filling it up with like a little ledge here, right? So this is going to be a rock cliff or something like that going down. And then maybe there's going to be like a cliff here as well. I was also thinking of having a tiny stream crossing the path to meet the bigger stream to the left. Well, if we're talking about that, we need to think about like how water reacts, right? Because water creates erosion, right? Like water will literally carve pathways into terrain. And it will also follow the path of least resistance. So it becomes a little bit more, it becomes a little bit harder to convince me that this is where the water would go if this section is literally going to be lower, right? Not that it doesn't exist, but it becomes like harder for me to feel that that is the way that water would run, right? However, what we can still do is we can kind of keep that into our plan, right? And then maybe we find like a better location to put it. So maybe what we could do, the main opportunity that I'm seeing is imagine that we're gonna be working with like a rock wall here, right? So imagine that this is like a little like waterfall that's coming down here. Right, so we kind of have like a waterfall on the right. And then maybe we do something with that instead. And then the rest of it, we're kind of just blocking off with like a bunch of trees. Right? Because I mean, you could do something like this, like maybe the waterfall. What I'm also thinking is I'm trying to stay away from having both a path and a waterfall. I think one of them can work because it becomes like this massive leading line through your environment, right? Where I could see one of them working. So let's say we remove the path completely, and let's say that the path is just like a little bit of a river that is coming down, right? That could be an interesting thing to do. However, big caveats there. A path is easy. A river is really hard to make look really, really nice. Because you have to think about the shader, you have to think about like how water interacts, like how is it running, you need to think about flow maps, you need to think about VFX, all that kind of stuff. And especially if it's not that important to your scene, it is, in most cases, maybe even worth to not have them at all. Just throwing that out there, right? Something to keep in mind. Cool. So that's about it for the composition, right? It was just a bunch of scribbles, but hey, sometimes that is what it is. I was thinking about making the river a side thing. I was gonna make a shader for it though. Maybe I should compromise on the smaller stream. I honestly think that in terms of like what you are trying to showcase for this scene, I don't think water needs to be in the picture at all. Like maybe what could be cool is what I'm thinking is this is no river in the background, it's just like a massive waterfall. And the reason why that is like way simpler is because now we only need to do like some VFX. And that's it, right? We just have like some fog coming down, and maybe we need to do the top of the Well, usually those massive waterfalls, they don't even have like a stream anymore, right? They almost like evaporate just because they're so high up and they get like hit by the wind. So yeah, that's the thing that I would do. Like try to, because that is going to be like the second question, right? Maybe let's start with that. So you were thinking about creating the feeling of a dense subtropical mountainous rainforest, and I think the landscape feels like a little bit more like rolling hills. I want to get that super steep Japanese misty mountain. So with that in mind, right, we need something that kind of links into that effect. So that's why I'm thinking it would be sick to just have like one of those like massive waterfalls that just, it is so big that it's not even a waterfall, it just evaporates, right? You can find some really cool reference for that. Yeah, just imagine that like at this point, like a waterfall comes down. Like at a certain point, it is just gonna be like evaporating in mist. So maybe that could be like an interesting thing to play around with. Now to your second question. You will definitely, like, you can only go so far with your terrain. You will need to have rocks for the scene. If this is what you want to do, then you will need rocks. You will need lots of them, like rocks and cliff assets. Because yeah, as you noticed, like you can only get so far, right? So what I would do in this case is anything close to the path. So let's say, anything within these borders, right? So anything within these borders, that could be visible landscape. And then anything where you have like lots of verticality happening, that is all just going to be like rock stuff. Then obviously we're going to have to look at where the trees go because they don't grow in rocks, but we can work around that. And then the same thing for these cliffs, right? Like if you want to have cliffs here, that is all just going to be like cliff assets until you can kind of see that they kind of blend into the landscape a little bit. But a lot of that is just going to be rock assets. So you're going to need a whole bunch of rock assets. So yeah. Because I think what I'm trying to get after is I'm imagining these pathways, right? And I'm just thinking about like the most generic like Himalayan like climbing expeditions, where if we're looking at it from the top down, what I'm imagining is that you have like this very slim pathway, and then honestly, cliff here, this is all just cliff. And then on the way down, it's also cliff. So that's what I'm imagining, right? Which basically, if we're trying to replicate that here, that means that it's going to be less forest, and it's literally just going to be like, imagine like a wall of rocks here. Which actually look pretty sick now that I'm drawing this. I'm playing it visually in my head, like I'm kind of seeing it in front of me. Could be really cool. And then you could kind of have like a tree that's kind of like trying to hang into it. And it's kind of growing from like outside. Like outside the rock, right? And it's kind of hanging into like it with its roots. Yeah. And then you play into what you want to do, right? Because then you have like the cliff on the left side and you have like a sheer mountain edge on the right side. And what it also does, this is also a good callback to what Alejandro was saying. I don't know. It doesn't really speak about that. But what I try to do, what I like in some of my compositions is like, imbalance, right? So that means that what we're basically doing, from like a very, very fundamental perspective, is let's say at this point our focal point is in the middle. We have just like a big block of stuff here, and then we have like a small block of stuff here, and then this is where we're walking, right? And we can kind of see that creates like a very out of balance contrast, which is also like pretty intriguing to kind of look at. Yeah. Right. Cool. Thank you so much. No worries. And thanks for staying up, Charlie. I appreciate it. Sweet dreams about this chaotic landscape. They're so evocative, though. I like looking at these. They look like so surreal. Crazy. Right. Cool stuff, Charlie. Thanks so much. Oh, a question from Slate. Will this be stylized or realistic? That's a good question, actually. I'm assuming stylized? Don't know if that's correct, though. It is. It is going to be stylized. Cool, cool, cool. Okay, we are trucking along. Corey, thank you for jumping in. I'm making my first game prop for school. I have no idea what I want to make. Do you have ideas or suggestions for a first piece? If you're making your first game prop for school, take anything in your house. Honestly, taking anything from your house that is like slightly interesting and you can have it next to you and you can rotate and you can look at all the details is going to be so valuable if you want to replicate something. I also have no context if it's going to be, are you going to fully texture it? Are you going to take it through the whole pipeline? Or is this more like a modeling exercise? But yeah, I mean, even then, like getting something that you have close by and you can actually look at it is going to be super interesting. The whole pipeline? Okay, cool. Yeah, try to find something interesting that you can see that you have close by. That would be my suggestion. Because if you really start looking around, you can find some really cool stuff. Or maybe, I don't know, like I have like a wacky uncle that has like a bunch of like old stuff like in his yard. Maybe find someone who has that, you know? I would honestly, I would look at it as like a treasure hunt. Like maybe there's like this old antique shop nearby. And just, you know, find something there, you know? That would be my thing. I would turn it into like a little bit of a treasure hunt at the same time. Where I'm like, ooh, I'm just gonna go to the local like antique shop and see what's there. Or maybe a flea market or anything, right? So much cool stuff that you can find. So you're saying maybe something that's not very common. Yeah. Unless it is so uncommon that people wouldn't believe it's a real thing, because that's also an issue, right? You gotta keep it somewhat believable. Otherwise, everyone's gonna be like, "There's no way. There's no way that this exists." Yeah, see, my grandpa is an inventor with a basement full of tools, tables, and stuff. I'll check it out there. Oh yeah, that's like the best source of inspiration that you have. That's awesome. All right. Moving on swiftly. So who was this from? Oh, Joe. Yeah. Okay. So Joe is asking two questions. First one is about the composition. So that's all the stuff that I did here, right? A couple of notes. The one that I started out with was this is an awesome iteration on the composition, right? I really love what you did with it already. What I what I don't particularly like about this little pathway that you have is that it feels so smushed into like the side of it that it's almost like it shouldn't be there. So I would move it up and give it more space. I I don't think I would particularly mind if it would kind of maybe curve into the space a little bit more, where for example it would do something like this, right? Maybe that's good enough, but it feels just like it's kind of smushed into the corner there. Um, right. That was the first thing that I noticed. And in the church as well. It seems like you did some more work on the church, which I do really like. You got the steeple aligned with the rule of thirds grid, right? Which is also really interesting. But that makes me wonder, like, okay, if we have the steeple aligned with the rule of thirds grid, can we not do something where we like rotate the church and make the steeple more of a prominent thing? Because the sort of issue that I have with it now, I'll do it on a new layer, is that the steeple is here, which is cool, but the brightest point is still here though. So your what is pretty distracting is that you have your focal point is like, or like your wannabe focal point is aligned with the rule of third grid somewhat, right? But then we're still distracting from it by just having the brightest point in the environment be like next to it, right? So I love that you added the steeple, which I think is really cool and it has a really cool silhouette. But then we need to find a way to either not make this the brightest point, or what I thought of, and this was my solution, right? So that doesn't mean that it needs to be yours, is that maybe if we rotate the church and then the steeple becomes a prominent point, if we just add that, if we just basically keep it at its local position, we just rotate it, and then the light is not coming out of the window, but out of the steeple itself, like maybe the doorway or like the window next to it or something that's closer related to that point, right? Because then I'm also thinking like, okay, cool, because now there's a door here, right? And then maybe the door is open, maybe it has like, I don't know, like half a door still in it or something like that, and then the rest of it, like that's where the light comes from. Something like that. And it doesn't need to be like 100% aligned with the camera. It's nice that it kind of, you can still have the windows in the back of it. But yeah, making the steeple like a bit more of a prominent point could be potentially really interesting. Because it makes it more inviting as well, right? Because if we look at this, we're almost like, okay, you want me to go here, but I don't know what's there, right? Whereas if we rotate it, we know exactly where we're going, right? We have like a clear path. And it makes for a clearer composition. Cool. That's it about the composition. Let's switch it over to some of the material questions, because you were asking what would be a good method to get the variation seen in the reference, mainly between the brick and the sandstone. I was thinking overlaying a model for the brick would be the easiest, but then some of the sandstone would have rough seams, I think. Well, yeah, that is true. That's also why you have to be really picky with like the shapes that you're going to be combining, right? So, for example, let's say if this is like the material that you're going to be using, then you're going to have to work around that material with the bricks, right? So what that is going to mean is that we usually have one of these around it first, right? And then what you'll have to do is you will kind of have to either like smoosh the UVs just a little bit or something like that, so that this stone will actually like properly align with this one, right? And then this one, this is, I don't know, maybe we'll have to swap it out with like a different section of the UV or something like that. But it becomes really difficult, right? So I think at this point, what we already need to do is we need to set ourselves up for success and have two textures that are sort of pretty similar in terms of their pattern, right? because that's going to make our life so much easier. But there's a bunch of stuff that you can do here with like squishing and moving the UVs and being very specific with it, right? So you can make it work. It's just going to be a lot of manual setup to get it to look as good as you want it to, right? You'll have to be very specific with how you UV stuff. It is doable, but it is going to be more work if you decide to do it this way. Might be worth the payoff though. Right, because then we have to do stuff like this. And then we're basically just working around the tileable, right? Right. And that's basically what I did here as well, right? So I would do that with like separate geo, as you said, or maybe I would potentially keep it like as like separate geo, just like slightly off of it. And I'm talking about like ever so slightly, right? That you can't really see any shadow or something between it, but it's just going to make your life easier if it's not one mesh, because then you don't have to worry about like, oh my God, all the lines and where do they go? How good does my topology flow? Makes it so much easier. You can do it. It's just going to be a puzzle, right? That's basically what they had to do as well. You're just going to do like a 3D version of this puzzle. So have fun. Right. Moving on. Next one we have from Jake. This is more of a design question. So after making a custom belt curve brush, this is going to be used for the strapping. I'm looking for feedback on the usability of the design. Okay, so let's actually have a look at it. I had a look at just how this thing is supposed to be working, right? And eventually, like the initial thing is like pretty cool. But if you ask me about the usability of it, the main question that I had is like, okay, we have these tubes basically coming from his cheeks, going straight into his mouth. That feels weird because you're setting up this whole dynamic between like, oh, something is coming from his face and it's going into his mouth. Even though I know that like the way you designed it is like these are capsules that he can insert into like the side of his mask, but that feels like it's weird design, right? Because if we're supposed to be inhaling it, why don't I just like put them on my mask and then it just like aerosol sprays inside of it, right? Like, why do I need the tubes? So that's basically where I was going, right? So a couple of things is like either we cut the cables and we don't make the cables and we do something more interesting with the mouthpiece, right? Where we basically add like a gas mask or something like that on top of it, maybe. Or we move like these antibiotic canisters like somewhere else, right? So either like on the back of the head or like on the shoulders or I don't know, in the backpack or something like that, where it's not like a canister, but it's like a full backpack of stuff. Making it a bit more, a bit more interesting that way. I had to look at some quick references as well for this, because I was thinking about, okay, how... Because you had this idea of, oh, the whole thing is rushed together, right? So I'm thinking about, okay, let's imagine myself, right? Like if we're in the post-apocalypse, like what would I grab? What would I use for something like this? So I just started looking up some like, I don't know, like old gas masks. Maybe there's like some ski goggles or some swimming goggles or something like that, right? And then maybe they kind of kit bash it together. Kind of depends on what you want here. But then I stumbled upon this one. This is like an old rebreather system that they had for like old divers. And I did really like how the whole thing was just like set up, right? So you can kind of see it as like the same system that you have, a little bit more elaborate, but it actually goes to like a whole system that's attached to his chest, right? I'm not saying that you have to do the whole system, but imagine if you do just have like the shoulder pads with just like a couple of like flasks, right? Let's say like 2 flasks and then The tube kind of just goes into like the flasks, and that's it. Right, like something like that. And that starts to make, because now we removed like the design from being just like all around the mouth. We're trying to make it like a little bit more elaborate, and we're spreading it around a little bit more where it kind of makes sense. Because yeah, just everything just being attached to the head. I don't know. Like it kind of feels like we need to move things off of the head, or maybe onto the shoulders or something like that, where you have like canisters on the shoulders, or at least somewhere else where, again, we're not thinking about like taking stuff from our cheek to our mouth, right? Because that feels so close that it kind of feels like, oh, I could just stick it in and just have it aerosol spray in. But that was honestly my main point of contention from the design point of it, right? Well, the 2 points basically. The one was like the cable design, and then also like if it's put together in a rush, what is it made out of, right? Because you had this image here. I'll show it. But for example, you had this image here, and you did like a whole breakdown of like all the materials used. But actually, this could be way more interesting in terms of not what material it is, but what is it made out of, right? So you say like, ooh, the mask is like swimming goggles, and then the over mask is like, I don't know, a cut off piece of a plastic bottle or something like that, right? That they then like sellotaped like to like a couple of tubes that come from like the inner tubing of like a bicycle. I'm naming some random stuff, right? But I kind of want to see that if you're telling me that this is like something that they made just like from like pretty last minute stuff, I want to see that translated into the visuals, right? Whether it is like really shitty visuals like I just said, or maybe they're an inventor and they have like other stuff lying around that's maybe more impressive, right? But you can, even with the materials and what they use, you can tell a story by just doing that by itself. So yeah, I hope that helped. A little bit more design thinking. It's good to get those muscles flexing every once in a while. Yeah. Cool stuff, Jake. I have no idea what this is for, actually. Oh, it's a university project. Okay. Yeah. That's cool. Yeah, if you, like, again, if you want to keep it to the simplest version possible, right? You can honestly just cut the cables, and I don't think you're going to lose that much. What we can then potentially do is we can change the silhouette of the canisters, right? And instead of having them coming straight from the face, we angle them down, and it adds this like aggressive look to the face. I think that could be pretty interesting. But yeah, best of luck with that, Jake. Cool little assignment, though. Right, and then last one for today. Because, yeah, I'm gonna have to cut it like pretty short today because I do need to go pretty soon because I got some important stuff coming up tomorrow. So I will see if I can make some time for some text feedback for the people that have missed the deadline. We'll see. So last one for today. Let's have a look at Max. So 2 questions for Max as well. Does the ground fog negatively impact the scene or muddy it? Would it be worth adding some terrain decals on the left-hand side of the embankment? Oh, I see. Oh, I thought you were literally talking about something else. I thought I read that as like, hey, look, if I want to make this muddy, like, how can I do that with the fog? So I was like, oh yeah, I definitely want to see some like, I don't know, some like water or mud in this area. Could look sick, right? Just like a slight, like a couple of pools, right? Just so that we get like a little bit of a roughness variation. That's what I'm thinking about, right? So a little bit more visual interest. But actually to your question, I don't think it does. I think the way that you used it is you've used it in a pretty good way, right? I think sometimes it's a little bit dense, but it's also like the lowest point in the scene, so I don't necessarily mind it too much. If you're worried about it though, you can cut it out to like 50% and see what that does to the scene, right? So yeah. The mood. It is so good. So maybe reducing the fog slightly, right? But that's something to play around with. I honestly don't think it's gonna make or break the scene, right? Like the fog that you have on the sides. So it's not too bad. Cool. And then the second question was with the ruins in, does this alter the scene too much? Would more be required to sell the idea that this used to be an old mountain outpost or a hut? I've considered hanging some ropes from the poles and attaching them to other areas to sell the idea that it became part of sort of a hidden camp. Well, I mean, the ruins look decent, right? I would say I was expecting you to be bolder with the silhouette if there's like one thing, right? Because like it's pretty much that. And I would honestly love to see just like, I don't know. It's a little bit bolder silhouetting going on, right? And then maybe with this one. Right, and then we have like the same window. I think the window is fine. Because yeah, there's so much things that you can get out of like these like smaller bumps, right? Because we're trying to sell the idea that it's like super detailed. So having these silhouettes look like really detailed is going to be super important, right? So having stuff like this almost going to like a flimsy kind of point, having like a little overhang. And it's almost like this is also something very subconscious, right? But you could have some like pretty aggressive shapes going on the scene as well. It's almost like, okay, we have some like very sharp stuff going on. So yeah, sharper silhouettes, that could work. My note though was not really about that. What I still want to see, because you brought up the idea of, oh, this is an old mountain outpost or a hut, right? Which could be cool. I do still want to see like a bit more purpose. Like, what was this hut before it got abandoned? Who is that person in the hut? You know, I'm still yearning for something deeper, right? So for example, if we wanna elaborate on the hut, right? Maybe what we can do is we can, let me see, I don't want to destroy the composition too much. Just have like a couple of poles, you know, like have like a couple of broken planks. And we can almost imagine that this was someone's like homestead before, right? Because we got like a little bit of a broken bridge here as well, which is cool. So I'm playing into that idea. That could be cool. And then also continuing some of those like silhouettes here as well. So again, because we got like some like cool curve going on. So if we can then just like elaborate some of those areas. And then once we have like a kit of just like generic looking planks and stuff, we can then just start adding more detail in the scene, right? Where maybe You turn some of those planks into like a section of like a broken barrel or something like that. And then you can kind of see what I'm trying to do, right? So like maybe here this was like um again, I don't want to destroy the composition too much, but maybe here this was like the old shed, right? So you still see like the remnants of the old shed with just like a couple of broken barrels or something like that in it. And maybe there's like a 2 planks on the floor here, or like 1 plank on the floor. God, I'm hesitant to do this because that is not going to look good for the composition. I don't really like that. It kind of kills some of the sharp shapes that we have going, right? So maybe just having like a slight outline of what was here before. And this side is just built up by like just like some old wooden fencing, you know, that's still there. And then we're giving the space like a little bit more purpose than just being like old ruins that are just nondescript ruins, right? We're trying to give like a little bit more meaning to the space and give like an indication that maybe at a certain point this was actually like a place where a farmer lived, you know? And maybe we can see like remnants of that, right? Like even I'm playing around with some ideas now, right? But maybe like one of those like old pig troughs, you know, where you can see like there's like a pig feed tray. Maybe it's broken. You don't really see it all anymore. Some stuff like that could be pretty interesting. And then again, oh, you can do so much beautiful stuff with some symbolism here, right? We talked about the tree last time around. Maybe like a broken flag or something like that. And then maybe, okay, maybe what we see here is, okay, we're going to play around with symbolism. Right? Okay. That's like the symbol on the flag, and then what we see is like this guy is wearing like a cloth where it has like the same symbol. And then this is like a guy from a different tribe, so he has like the X symbol. Right? And what I'm trying to infuse it with some sort of like either storytelling through symbolism or through like the infrastructure that's built up, right? Or like a combination of the two, where we can infuse it into giving meaning to this space that these two random people are fighting over, right? But if you pay attention, we can actually see that this is supposed to be like maybe a lookout post for one faction that is now taken over by another faction, right? Or like something like that. But yeah, all this like, you know, tiny hints at like what happened here before, that can actually help a lot in the storytelling. Scattered skulls, that could be definitely an option for sure. It depends on how crazy you want to go, right? Because I'm thinking now, oh, it could be kind of cool to have like a little bit of like a dirt trail going, so you can see like this guy kind of walking here like every day, right? And you kind of clear a path for it ever so slightly. Scattered skulls. This is the thing, right? Like you can go, the mind is racing now, right? You can do whatever you want with this scene. It's like it just depends on what I would say is it making the story more engaging, right? That is what I visually want to see. It doesn't matter if it's scattered skulls, if it's more set dressing like I did, if it's like the symbolism through the flags, if it's whatever. I think Max in this case, I don't know if Max wants to take it like in a different direction, that would be totally fine as long as it's adding to the storytelling, right? As we're trying to trying to visually tell something. Hello, Fair. Welcome, welcome. Yeah, overall, really, really cool scene, though. You know, really cool scene. We have some really cool stuff going on. Really cool stuff going on already. It's just okay. How do we take it from here? Right? Like, where do we take it? Like, how do we make it more interesting than it currently is? Right? And this is some of the stuff that could really, really help. Because I decided to go with the route of let's say a farmer, right? That's sort of the route that I went with. You can also completely scratch this entire idea, and maybe it's a mountain, like a former mine outpost, right? Because the reason why I say that is because I'm currently looking at this, and I'm like, ooh, what if you just add like a bunch of planks, and this is like, like one of those like old mining outposts. You don't have to have the tracks, right? But you could almost have like a tracks coming out of it. And it's all just like partially shattered and collapsed and falling apart and shit. But maybe there's still valuables in there, right? That's why that outpost is there. And maybe this then turns into like, okay, someone set up like a temporary thing. Right? And let's say they have like a couple of poles here. I don't know. This is ruining the whole composition. I don't like what this is doing, but just follow the idea, right? We can almost have just like a setup like this. And you can see that someone is trying to build a shelter here because they still have something. So number one is like, ooh, there's still valuables in this mine. They potentially just store it here into like large buckets or containers or whatever. And then at a certain point, they're going to get dragged out of the scene. But this person stepped in and was like, hey, look, this loot is mine, right? We can kind of visually play with those ideas. And whether it's like a mining outpost, whether it's a farm, it can be whatever, right? We can play into what's already there at this point. Cool. Right, but yeah. Thanks for sharing your work, Max. Really, really cool to see. And yeah, thanks everyone for the suggestions as well. Right. As you all know, last couple of sessions were pretty lengthy, so I am gonna take my leave, even though it was like pretty short. But I do have to get up like really early in the morning, so I'm just gonna post all the works from people in their community tab on our lovely little Discord. Yeah, and then honestly, I'm gonna prepare to go to bed and spend the whole day traveling tomorrow. Which is going to be good. It's going to be busy, but yeah, it's going to be exhausting as well. Okay, thank you all so much for being here. Lovely to have you all here until the end. You know the drill. If you're not in the community yet, come and join us. We're a lovely piece of crowd. And yeah, if you want to get your work seen by myself, get some feedback, all that kind of good stuff, I'll do this on a weekly basis. So I'll be there next week. Cool. Without further ado, have a nice evening, everyone, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.